The morning sun streamed through the massive windows of O'Hare International Airport, casting long shadows across the busy terminal. Maya Johnson rubbed her tired eyes and took another sip of her lukewarm coffee. After 14 hours of travel from London, including a bumpy overnight flight with a crying baby 2 rows behind her, she was running on fumes and caffeine. Maya checked her watch, 6:45 a.m. Her connecting flight to San Francisco wasn't until 9:30, plenty of time, but not enough to justify finding a hotel. Not that she would have slept anyway. Her mind was too busy running through slides and figures for the meeting that afternoon. At 38, Maya had built a reputation as one of the sharpest minds in investment banking. As Senior Vice President of Acquisitions at Global Financial Partners, she specialized in complex mergers that other bankers considered impossible. Today's meeting represented months of delicate negotiations, a $1.2 billion merger between Cloudsphere Tech and Transglobal Industries that would reshape both the technology and transportation sectors. She pulled her carry-on behind her, its wheels clicking rhythmically against the floor tiles. The terminal was starting to fill with morning travelers, business people clutching coffee cups, families corralling sleepy children, airport staff beginning their shifts with varying levels of enthusiasm. Maya spotted a customer service desk with a shorter line and made her way over. Her connecting flight information hadn't appeared properly on her phone app, and she wanted to double-check her gate assignment. Better to sort it out now than rush later. 3 people stood in line ahead of her, an elderly couple struggling with their boarding passes, and a young man who seemed to be arguing about baggage fees. Maya waited patiently, scrolling through email notifications that had accumulated during her flight. The CEO of Cloudsphere had sent her 3 messages overnight, each one more anxious than the last. "We're counting on you," read the final one. "This merger is everything." No pressure, Maya thought with a wry smile. Just another billion-dollar deal resting on her shoulders. When it was finally her turn, Maya approached the counter where 2 staff members were working. The name tag on the man's uniform read, Trevor. He was middle-aged with thinning hair and a face that suggested he'd already had enough of this day, despite it being barely 7 a.m. "Good morning," Maya said, placing her passport and boarding pass on the counter. "I'm on the 9:30 flight to San Francisco, but it's not showing up properly on my app. Could you confirm my gate assignment, please?" Trevor looked up at her, then at his female colleague beside him before turning back to Maya. Something in his expression shifted, a subtle change that Maya had seen countless times before. A barely perceptible narrowing of the eyes, a slight twitch at the corner of his mouth. "Your flight to San Francisco," he said, drawing out the word with an exaggerated accent that sounded nothing like how Maya had spoken. "Let me check that for you." His colleague glanced over, a small smile playing on her lips. Maya kept her expression neutral, though she felt a familiar tightness in her chest. She'd faced this before. People who seemed surprised by the disconnect between her appearance and her voice, her education, her position. After graduating top of her class at Howard University and earning her MBA from Wharton, after climbing the ranks at one of the most prestigious financial firms in the country, after closing deals worth billions, still, there were people who looked at her and saw only the color of her skin. Trevor typed something into his computer, taking longer than necessary. "So you're headed to a meeting or something?" he asked, glancing at her professional attire. "Yes," Maya replied simply. She didn't owe him an explanation. "Must be important," he continued, still typing. "Big executive like you." The woman beside him smirked again. Maya remained silent, waiting for her flight information. "Your flight's at gate C22, Trevor finally said, pushing her documents back across the counter. Then leaning toward his colleague but speaking loudly enough for Maya to hear, he added, "Your voice funny. Doesn't match, you know." The woman let out a small laugh, quickly covering her mouth. Maya felt heat rise to her face, but years in boardrooms dominated by men who underestimated her had taught her to control her reactions. She'd learned long ago that displaying anger would only reinforce their stereotypes. "Excuse me," she said, her tone measured and calm. "Oh, nothing," Trevor said, not meeting her eyes. "Just saying, with that fancy suit and all, wasn't expecting you to sound like that." "No offense." Several emotions flooded through Maya at once. Anger, humiliation, exhaustion, and a bone-deep weariness at having to face this yet again. But what surfaced was resolve. the resolve that had carried her from a childhood in Southside Chicago to the pinnacle of Wall Street. "My voice is perfectly fine," she said, each word crisp and deliberate. "What's concerning is your customer service approach. May I have your employee ID number?" Trevor's smirk faltered. "Look, it was just a joke. Don't need to get all—" "Your employee ID number," Maya repeated, taking out her phone. "Or should I ask for your supervisor instead?" The colleague's smile had completely disappeared. "Trevor, just give her the number," she muttered. Trevor's face hardened. "It's right here on my badge," he said, tapping his chest where his ID was displayed. "But go ahead, complain all you want. Nothing's gonna happen." Maya took a photo of his badge with her phone. "Thank you for confirming my gate," she said, gathering her things. Several people in line behind her had witnessed the exchange, their expressions ranging from uncomfortable to embarrassed, but none had spoken up. As Maya walked away, she heard Trevor say to his colleague, "She'll probably talk normal once she gets to her fancy meeting." Maya kept walking, her back straight, her pace measured. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing how much their words had affected her. She found a quiet corner near her gate, sat down, and took several deep breaths. Her phone buzzed with another email from Cloudsphere's CEO. "Any update on your arrival time?" Board members asking. Maya looked out the massive windows where planes were taking off and landing against the backdrop of an increasingly bright morning sky. In a few hours, she would be sitting at the head of a conference table, orchestrating a deal that would transform two major companies and impact thousands of jobs. Her voice, the one Trevor had mocked, would be the one everyone in that room listened to with respect and attention. She thought about sending an email to the airport's customer service department but decided against it. She had a more important focus today. The incident would have to be dealt with later. Opening her laptop, Maya pulled up the presentation she'd been refining for weeks. Graphs showing projected growth, charts illustrating market expansion, slides detailing the synergies between Cloudsphere's innovative software and TransGlobal's vast transportation network. At the center of it all was the airport. Division, TransGlobal owned several regional airports and was looking to expand their operations with this merger. The irony wasn't lost on Maya. The very airport where she'd just been, humiliated, could potentially become part of the corporate structure she was helping to build. The thought gave her pause. She took another sip of her now cold coffee and stared at the screen without really seeing it. Throughout her career, Maya had compartmentalized these incidents. The subtle jabs, the not-so-subtle insults, the constant need to prove herself worthy of the space she occupied. She tucked them away in a corner of her mind and pushed forward, focusing on the work, the numbers, the deals. But lately, she'd been wondering about the cost of that approach, about what it meant to help build systems and structures where people like Trevor could treat others that way, without consequences, about her responsibility, given her position of influence. An announcement came over the loudspeaker, calling for boarding of a flight to Detroit. Around her, the airport continued its constant motion, people coming and going, lives intersecting briefly before continuing on their separate journeys. Maya closed her laptop. There would be time on the flight to review her presentation again. Right now, she needed to clear her head. She stood up and walked to the large window, watching as a plane lifted off into the morning sky, becoming smaller and smaller until it was just a speck against the blue. In her mind, the meeting in San Francisco began to take on a different dimension. Perhaps there was more at stake today than just a billion-dollar merger. Perhaps this was about something more fundamental, about what kind of world she was helping to build, and whether there was room in it for everyone's dignity. Maya adjusted her suit jacket and picked up her carry-on. 3 more hours until her flight, and then a decision to make. Maya's flight to San Francisco was called for boarding right on schedule. She joined the line of travelers, her mind still replaying the incident with Trevor. As a first-class passenger, she was among the first to board, nodding politely to the flight attendants who welcomed her aboard with professional smiles. She found her seat by the window, stowed her carry-on, and settled in. The leather seat was comfortable, spacious, one of the few luxuries her company expense account allowed. Next to her, a middle-aged woman with silver-streaked hair was arranging her things in the adjacent seat. "Morning," the woman said with a friendly nod. "Looks like we're sharing this little corner for a few hours." "Good morning," Maya replied, offering a small smile in return. The woman extended her hand. I'm Patricia, heading to San Francisco for a teachers' conference. Maya shook her hand. Maya, business meeting. Must be important, Patricia said, gesturing to Maya's tailored suit. You look very official. There was no mockery in Patricia's tone, just simple observation, but Maya felt her defenses rise automatically. She'd grown used to filtering every interaction, searching for hidden meanings or subtle jabs. It's a merger negotiation, Maya found herself saying. I work in investment banking. Patricia's eyebrows rose. Impressive. My daughter just finished her finance degree. She'd probably be starstruck meeting you. Not many women at the top of that field, from what she tells me. Before Maya could respond, the flight attendants began their safety demonstration. She was grateful for the interruption, using the time to mentally shift gears. She needed to focus on the meeting ahead, not dwell on what had happened at the airport. Once they were airborne and the seatbelt sign turned off, Maya opened her laptop. She had a 2-hour flight to review her presentation one last time, to anticipate every possible question or objection that might arise. But the words on the screen blurred together. She couldn't concentrate. Trevor's mocking voice kept echoing in her mind. Your voice funny. She closed her eyes briefly, trying to center herself. This wasn't the first time she'd faced discrimination, subtle or otherwise. As one of the few black women in her position, she'd encountered plenty of obstacles. Professors who suggested she might be more comfortable in a different field, colleagues who assumed she was the assistant rather than the lead, clients who looked past her to address her white male subordinates. Each time, she'd pushed through by focusing on her work, letting her results speak for themselves. She'd built walls around these experiences, compartmentalizing them so they wouldn't interfere with her success. But today, something felt different. Maybe it was the exhaustion from travel, or the pressure of the upcoming meeting, or simply the accumulated weight of too many similar incidents. Whatever the reason, she couldn't seem to push this one aside. Are you all right? Patricia asked beside her. You look like you're carrying the weight of the world. Maya opened her eyes. Just tired. Long flight from London before this. Patricia nodded sympathetically. International travel is brutal. My husband does it for work sometimes, and he's always a zombie for days afterward. A flight attendant approached with the beverage cart. Something to drink? She asked. Just water, please, Maya said. The flight attendant handed her a bottle of water and a glass with ice. Beautiful earrings, she commented, nodding at Maya's simple gold hoops. Thank you, Maya replied, the small kindness unexpectedly touching after the morning's encounter. As the flight attendant moved on, Maya turned to look out the window. Below, patches of clouds drifted over farmland, the landscape a patchwork of greens and browns. From this height, human-made divisions disappeared. No borders, no segregated neighborhoods. No glass ceilings, just earth, you know, Patricia said, breaking the silence. My daughter almost quit her finance program in the second year. Maya turned back to her. Why's that? A professor told her she didn't have the natural aptitude for quantitative analysis. Patricia made air quotes with her fingers, which was ridiculous because she'd always excelled at math. When she asked for specific areas to improve, he just said some people are born with it and some aren't. Maya felt a flash of recognition. What did she do? She went to the department head with her test scores and project results. Turned out this professor had said similar things to other female students. There was an investigation, and he was eventually removed from teaching required courses. Patricia smiled proudly. She graduated top of her class last year. Good for her, Maya said, meaning it. It still makes me angry, though, Patricia continued, thinking about how many other young women might have believed him and given up before my daughter spoke up. She shook her head. Sometimes I wonder if staying quiet is the same as agreeing. The words hit Maya like a physical force. Had she been complicit in her silence? Every time she'd swallowed an insult, ignored a slight, or let a microaggression pass without comment, had she been making it easier for the next person to be treated the same way? She thought about all the younger women at her firm, especially the women of color who looked to her as a trailblazer. What message was she sending them by compartmentalizing these experiences rather than addressing them? The captain's voice came over the intercom, announcing their initial descent into San Francisco. Maya put away her laptop, having barely looked at her presentation. For the first time in her career, she felt unprepared for a major meeting. but her mind was churning with other thoughts. As the plane began its descent, she gazed out at the city coming into view, San Francisco with its iconic bridge, hills and bay glistening in the morning sun. Somewhere down there in one of those skyscrapers, executives from 2 major corporations were gathering, waiting for her to arrive and guide them through a complex merger that would reshape their industries. The plane landed smoothly and taxied to the gate. Passengers around her began gathering their belongings, turning on phones, preparing to re-enter the world of deadlines and commitments. "It was nice meeting you, Maya," Patricia said as they stood to disembark. "Good luck with your meeting." "Thank you," Maya replied. "And thank you for sharing your daughter's story. It gave me something to think about." Patricia smiled warmly. Sometimes the most important conversations are the ones we have by chance. As Maya made her way through the San Francisco airport, her phone buzzed constantly with messages from her team, from the clients, from her boss checking in. She responded automatically, confirming her arrival, her transportation to the meeting, her readiness to proceed. But inwardly, she was still wrestling with the question that had taken root during the flight. What was her responsibility in this moment? The airport was crowded with morning travelers, a diverse mix of people rushing to destinations wrapped in their own concerns. Maya caught a glimpse of herself reflected in a glass wall, the perfect image of corporate success in her tailored suit, sleek briefcase, confident stride. The face she presented to the world. Outside, a car service was waiting. The driver held a sign with M. Johnson, Global Financial Partners, and took her bag when she approached. "Good morning, Ms. Johnson," he said, opening the car door. "Traffic is light today. We should have you at TransGlobal headquarters in 20 minutes. "Thank you," she replied, settling into the back seat. As the car pulled away from the curb, Maya looked at her reflection in the tinted window. In 20 minutes, she would walk into a boardroom filled with powerful executives. They would listen to her voice, the same voice Trevor had, mocked, as she guided them through one of the biggest business decisions of their careers. She had always believed that success was the best revenge against prejudice, that excellence was its own form of resistance. Be so good they can't ignore you. Work twice as hard to get half as far. All the mantras she'd lived by throughout her career. But what if there was another way to use her position? What if, instead of compartmentalizing these experiences, she brought them into the light? What if her voice could do more than just close deals? The San Francisco skyline drew closer, the morning sun reflecting off glass and steel. Maya took a deep breath and opened her briefcase, pulling out the folder containing the final merger documents, hundreds of pages representing months of work, billions in assets, and thousands of jobs. Inside was also a smaller folder, the due diligence report on TransGlobal's corporate culture and employment practices. She'd reviewed it perfunctorily before, focusing mainly on financial liabilities. Now, she opened it again, this time looking more closely at the sections on diversity initiatives, complaint procedures, and corporate values. What she found, or rather, what she didn't find, made her sit up straighter. TransGlobal's Airport Services division had an unusually high turnover rate among minority employees. There were several pending EEOC complaints that had been settled quietly. The company's diversity initiatives were mostly superficial, with little accountability for results. By the time the car pulled up to TransGlobal's headquarters, Maya had made a decision. She wasn't sure yet exactly what she would do, but she knew she couldn't proceed as if nothing had happened. Her voice, the one Trevor had found so funny, was about to become very important indeed. The driver opened her door. "We've arrived, Ms. Johnson. Good luck with your meeting." Maya stepped out of the car and looked up at the gleaming tower before her. "Thank you," she said. "I think I'm going to need it." TransGlobal's headquarters occupied the top 15 floors of a glass tower in downtown San Francisco. Maya rode the elevator to the 42nd floor, using the time to gather her thoughts. The elevator walls were mirrored, and she caught glimpses of herself from every angle, straightening her jacket, checking her expression, making sure nothing in her appearance betrayed the storm brewing inside her. The doors opened to reveal a reception area designed to impress. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered spectacular views of the bay, while modern artwork adorned the walls. The TransGlobal logo, a stylized globe with arrows circling it, dominated the space behind the reception desk. "Good morning," said the receptionist, A young man, with a polished smile. "You must be Ms. Johnson from Global Financial Partners." Maya nodded. "I am. Here for the 11:30 meeting with Mr. Chen and the board." "They're expecting you," he said, standing up. "Let me show you to the conference room. Your team arrived about 20 minutes ago and is already set up." Maya followed him down a corridor lined with framed photographs of trans-global properties around the world. Shipping ports, railway stations, and airports. She recognized O'Hare in one of the images and felt a twist in her stomach. The conference room door was open, revealing a long table surrounded by people in business attire. Conversation stopped as she entered, and all eyes turned to her. "Maya." A tall man with salt and pepper hair approached with his hand extended. This was David Wong, her firm's managing partner who had flown in from New York for the final negotiations. "Right on time. We were just getting acquainted." Maya shook his hand, then turned to greet the others. Her team from Global Financial Partners sat on one side of the table. 3 analysts and a legal advisor she'd handpicked for this deal. Across from them were the trans-global executives, including CEO Robert Chen, who rose to greet her. "Ms. Johnson," Chen said, his handshake firm. "At last we meet in person after so many video calls. Your reputation precedes you." "Thank you for hosting us, Mr. Chen," Maya replied, her professional mask firmly in place despite her inner turmoil. "I'm looking forward to finalizing this merger." "As are we," Chen said, gesturing to the seat at the head of the table. "Please, you have the floor." Maya opened her briefcase and removed her tablet as everyone settled into their seats. The room hummed with anticipation. This meeting represented the culmination of months of work: financial analyses, market projections, legal reviews, and endless negotiations. The merger would combine CloudSphere's cutting-edge logistics software with TransGlobal's physical infrastructure, creating an integrated transportation giant with unparalleled efficiency. Normally, this was the moment Maya lived for, the high-stakes finale where her expertise shined brightest. But today, as she looked around the table at the expectant faces, she felt a strange disconnection from the proceedings. "Before we begin," she said, "I'd like to thank everyone for their hard work getting us to this point. This merger represents a significant opportunity for both companies." She launched her presentation, and the room lights dimmed slightly as the large screen behind her came to life. The first slide displayed the merger overview: $1.2 billion in combined assets, projected growth figures, and the tagline, "Connecting Tomorrow's World." Maya moved through the presentation with practiced ease, highlighting key points, addressing potential concerns, explaining complex financial structures in accessible terms. It was a performance she had perfected over years of similar deals. "The merger will create approximately 2,500 new jobs over the next 5 years, she said, advancing to a slide showing employment projections, primarily in technology implementation at TransGlobal's existing facilities, including the airports division?" asked Chen. Maya paused, her finger hovering over the tablet. "Yes," she said. "In fact, the airports division represents one of the largest areas for potential growth under the merger plan." She advanced to the next slide, which showed a map of TransGlobal's 12 regional airports across the country, including O'Hare. CloudSphere's logistics software would be implemented across all these locations, she continued, creating a seamless transportation network with real-time tracking and resource allocation. As she spoke, Maya felt a strange sense of déjà vu. Here she was, outlining a plan that would pour millions of dollars into the very system where, just hours ago, she had been humiliated. The irony wasn't lost on her. Ms. Johnson, one of the TransGlobal board members, an older woman with short gray hair, was looking at her expectantly. Maya realized she had fallen silent mid-sentence. "I apologize," she said. "As I was saying, the software implementation would begin at O'Hare as a pilot program, then roll out to the other airports over the following 18 months. She continued with the presentation, but a part of her mind remained detached, observing the scene as if from a distance. These people in their expensive suits making decisions that would affect thousands of lives. Did they ever think about the culture they were creating? Did they know or care how their employees behaved when there were no executives watching? "And now," Maya said, reaching the financial section of the presentation, "let's look at the projected returns on investment." The numbers were impressive, 15% growth in the first year alone, with accelerating returns as the integrated systems came online, The board members nodded approvingly as she walked them through the projections. Any questions on the financial overview before we move to the implementation timeline? Maya asked. The room was quiet for a moment, then Robert Chen spoke up. These projections assume a smooth cultural integration between the companies. What's your assessment of potential friction points? It was a standard question in merger discussions, typically answered with bland assurances about shared corporate values and transition management strategies. Maya had given such answers dozens of times before. But today, standing in that room with Trevor's mocking voice still echoing in her mind, she couldn't bring herself to recite the usual platitudes. Actually, she said, setting down her tablet, that's an excellent question. Mr. Chen, cultural integration is indeed a critical factor in merger success. She took a breath, feeling David Wong's curious gaze from across the table. During our due diligence process, we examined TransGlobal's corporate culture across several dimensions. Maya continued, her voice steady. While there are many positive aspects, I did note some concerning patterns, particularly in the airports division. The atmosphere in the room subtly shifted. Chen's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. What sort of patterns? He asked, his tone carefully neutral. Maya met his gaze directly. Higher turnover rates among minority employees compared to industry averages. Several settled EOC complaints over the past 3 years. Limited diversity in management positions despite a diverse overall workforce. A silence fell over the room. This wasn't part of the planned presentation. David Wong cleared his throat. Perhaps we should move on to the implementation timeline. No, Chen interrupted, his eyes still on Maya. I'd like to hear more about these concerns. This is the first I'm hearing of them. Maya hadn't planned to take this direction, but now that she'd started, she felt compelled to continue. Mr. Chen, I believe that successful mergers require complete transparency. The data suggests potential issues with workplace culture that could affect employee retention and, ultimately, the projected returns we just discussed. She paused, then added, in fact, I experienced something this morning that reinforced these concerns. Every face in the room turned to her with renewed interest. Maya could feel David Wong's alarm radiating from across the table, but she pressed on. I had a layover at O'Hare Airport, which, as you know, is one of TransGlobal's properties. While there, I was mocked by a customer service representative because of my voice, or more specifically, because my voice didn't match what he expected from someone who looks like me. The room was absolutely still now. Chen's expression had shifted from mild concern to something harder to read. The employee felt comfortable enough to make these comments openly, in front of other staff and customers, Maya continued. That suggests a workplace culture where such behavior is, if not encouraged, then at least tolerated. I'm very sorry to hear that happen to you, Chen said after a moment. That's completely unacceptable behavior and doesn't reflect our company values. With all due respect, Mr. Chen, Maya replied, company values are defined by actions, not mission statements. When I reviewed your diversity and inclusion initiatives as part of our due diligence, I found they were largely symbolic. Diversity councils with no actual authority, training programs with no accountability measures, stated goals with no consequences for failing to meet them. David Wong was now staring at her with undisguised alarm. This wasn't how merger meetings were supposed to go. Maya knew she was breaking all the unspoken rules, potentially jeopardizing months of work and a substantial commission for her firm. But as she looked around at the surprised faces of the executives, she realized she couldn't go back to business as usual. Not today, perhaps not ever again. Ms. Johnson, Chen said slowly, I appreciate your candor. Clearly, if what you experienced is representative of broader issues, that's something we need to address. But I'm not sure how it relates to the merger at hand. Maya nodded. It relates directly to your question about cultural integration, Mr. Chen. Cloudsphere has one of the strongest diversity and inclusion records in the TIK industry. Their corporate culture is built on respect and equity. The friction point I see isn't between software engineers and transportation specialists. It's between a company that values all its employees and one that may not. The tension in the room was palpable now. One of the TransGlobal board members whispered something to Chen, who nodded slightly. Perhaps, Chen suggested, we should take a short break to reflect on these concerns, then reconvene to discuss how they might be addressed within the merger framework. Maya glanced at her watch. It was just past noon. A break sounds good, she agreed. shall we say 30 minutes. As the room began to empty, David Wong remained seated, his expression a mix of confusion and concern. When they were alone, he leaned forward. "Maya," he said quietly, "what are you doing? We're at the 1-yard line with this deal." She met his gaze steadily. "I'm doing my job, David. Making sure our client understands all the factors that could affect this merger's success." By bringing up a personal incident? By questioning their corporate culture at the 11th hour? He shook his head. "This isn't like you." "Maybe it should be," Maya replied, gathering her notes. "Maybe it should have been all along." The 30-minute break stretched to 45 as executives huddled in corners of the hallway, speaking in hushed tones. Maya sat alone in a small side office that David had found for her, staring out at the San Francisco skyline. Her phone buzzed constantly with messages from her team members, all variations of "what's happening" and "are you okay?" She replied to none of them. Instead, she found herself scrolling through old photos on her phone, pictures of her younger self at her college graduation, standing proud in her cap and gown, a snapshot with her parents outside their Chicago home, her first day at Global Financial Partners 8 years ago, nervous but determined. The journey that had brought her to this moment had not been easy, and she had the battle scars to prove it. A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. It was Layla, the youngest member of her team, a brilliant analyst who reminded Maya of herself a decade ago. "Sorry to bother you," Layla said, hovering uncertainly in the doorway. "They're ready to reconvene. Mr. Wong asked me to find you." Maya nodded, slipping her phone back into her pocket. "Thank you, Layla." As she stood to leave, Layla remained in the doorway, seemingly wanting to say something more. "Was there something else?" Maya asked. Layla hesitated, then spoke in a rush. "I just wanted to say, what you did in there, it was brave. I've never seen anyone talk to clients like that before, especially about these kinds of issues." The young woman's admiration was obvious, and Maya felt a strange mix of pride and sadness. How many times had she stayed silent when she should have spoken up? What example had she been setting for women like Layla who watched her every move? "Sometimes the hardest conversations are the most necessary ones," Maya said. "Remember that." Together they walked back to the conference room, which had transformed during the break. The long table had been rearranged into a more intimate square configuration. Robert Chen sat at one corner with only 3 other people present: David Wong, TransGlobal's Chief Operating Officer Lisa Patel, and their lead counsel, a gray-haired man whose name Maya couldn't recall. "Ms. Johnson," Chen said as she entered, "thank you for your patience. We thought a smaller group might facilitate a more productive discussion." Maya took the seat across from Chen, with David to her right. The room felt charged with tension. "Before we begin," Chen said, folding his hands on the table, "I want to personally apologize for your experience at O'Hare this morning. That kind of behavior is completely unacceptable, regardless of what you might have found in our corporate records." His apology seemed genuine, but Maya had heard similar sentiments too many times before, expressions of regret followed by nothing. "I appreciate that, Mr. Chen," she replied, "but I'm more interested in actions than apologies." Chen nodded, seemingly unsurprised by her response. "Fair enough. Lisa has some thoughts on that front." Lisa Patel leaned forward. "Ms. Johnson, first let me say that I value your directness. Too often these issues get buried under corporate speak and never truly addressed." She opened a folder in front of her. "I've reviewed the diversity data you referenced, and you're right. Our airports division has serious problems that go beyond a single incident." Maya hadn't expected this level of candor, and she felt a flicker of hope. "We've prepared a proposal," Lisa continued, sliding documents across the table. "A comprehensive overhaul of our workplace culture initiatives, with specific emphasis on the airports division, real accountability measures, binding diversity targets tied to executive compensation, mandatory bias training with effectiveness metrics, and a complete restructuring of our complaint procedures." Maya scanned the document, impressed despite her skepticism. These weren't the vague promises she was accustomed to seeing. These were concrete steps with timelines and accountability measures. "This is thorough," she acknowledged. "We can include these commitments as binding conditions in the merger agreement," Chen added. "Cloudsphere's CEO is already on board. I spoke with him during the break. He shares your concerns and applauds your advocacy." David Wong, who had been unusually quiet, finally spoke up. This seems like an excellent resolution. The merger proceeds with enhanced protections for workplace culture, and both companies demonstrate their commitment to addressing these important issues. He turned to Maya with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. A win-win, wouldn't you say? Maya felt the weight of expectations pressing down on her. This was the moment when she was supposed to nod and agree, to accept the compromise and move forward with the deal. It was a good offer, better than most companies would make. With these provisions in place, the merger would still be considered a massive success for her firm and a personal triumph for her career. And yet, what about Trevor? She asked. Chen looked confused. I'm sorry? Trevor, Maya repeated. The employee who mocked me this morning. What happens to him? Lisa Patel exchanged a glance with Chen before answering. We'll investigate the incident immediately, of course. If his behavior was as described, appropriate disciplinary action would be taken. Appropriate disciplinary action, Maya echoed. The phrase sounded hollow, bureaucratic. And what does that mean exactly? A note in his file? A slap on the wrist? That would depend on the findings of the investigation and his prior record, Lisa replied carefully. Our HR policies outline a progressive discipline approach. Let me be more specific, Maya interrupted. In your company, does publicly mocking a customer based on racial stereotypes result in termination? The silence that followed was answer enough. Maya closed the proposal document and set it aside. Mr. Chen, Ms. Patel, I believe your offer is sincere, but it's addressing symptoms rather than the disease. What disease would that be, Ms. Johnson? Chen asked, his tone still respectful but cooler now. A culture where people like Trevor feel comfortable behaving that way in the first place, Maya said. Where bias is so normalized that it takes $1 billion deal being threatened to get anyone's attention. David Wong shifted uncomfortably beside her. Maya, perhaps we could discuss this privately before. No, David, I don't think we need to, Maya said firmly. She looked directly at Chen. Mr. Chen, I can't in good conscience recommend this merger to my clients. The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. David's face drained of color. Chen's expression hardened, and Lisa Patel sat back in her chair, her surprise evident. Maya, David said, his voice tight. May I remind you that you don't have unilateral authority to— I'm aware of my role, David. Maya cut in. As lead negotiator, my recommendation carries significant weight with the board, and my recommendation will be to walk away. Chen studied her for a long moment. Because of one incident with one employee? No, Maya replied. Because that one incident is indicative of a pervasive culture that these last-minute proposals won't fix. She gestured to the documents. Real change doesn't come from policies and trainings. It comes from values that are demonstrated every day at every level of an organization. She stood up, gathering her materials. I'll be submitting my I'll report to both boards by tomorrow morning. You'll find it includes alternative partnership structures that fall short of a full merger but might allow for collaboration in areas where your corporate cultures are more aligned. The room was deadly quiet as she packed her briefcase. Chen and Lisa exchanged glances while David stared at her with a mix of disbelief and anger. Maya, David said in a low voice as she prepared to leave, you're throwing away months of work, your reputation, possibly your career. She paused, considering his words. Perhaps he was right. Walking away from this deal would have consequences, for the companies involved, for her firm, for her personally. The commission alone would have set her up for years. The prestige would have cemented her position as one of the top deal-makers in the industry. But as she looked at the faces around the table, stunned, confused, calculating the costs of her decision, she realized there were other costs she was no longer willing to pay. Some things matter more than deals. David, she said simply, as she turned to leave. Chen spoke up. Ms. Johnson. His voice had lost its friendly corporate tone, revealing something harder beneath. You're making a mistake, one you might not recover from professionally. Maya met his gaze steadily. No, Mr. Chen. For the first time in a long time, I don't think I am. She walked out of the conference room, past the surprised faces of waiting executives, past the modern artwork and floor-to-ceiling views. The weight that had been pressing on her chest since that morning at O'Hare seemed to lift with each step. In the elevator down, she leaned against the wall and took a deep breath. Her phone was already buzzing nonstop. David, her boss in New York, probably even Cloudsphere's CEO by now. She silenced it and slipped it into her pocket. The doors opened to the building's grand lobby, and Maya stepped out into the afternoon sunshine streaming through the glass entrance. Outside, the streets of San Francisco bustled with activity, people hurrying to meetings, tourists taking photos, workers on lunch breaks enjoying the warm day. She hailed a taxi and gave the driver the address of her hotel. As the car pulled away from the curb, she looked back at TransGlobal's gleaming tower, wondering what was happening in that conference room right now. Damage control, most likely. Angry phone calls, accusations. But for the first time since she'd boarded her flight in London, Maya felt at peace. Whatever came next, the professional fallout, the difficult conversations, the uncertain future, she would face it knowing she had finally used her voice for something that mattered more than money. The taxi wove through the city streets, carrying her away from the deal she'd just walked away from and toward something she couldn't yet define, but somehow knew was right. Out the window, the Golden Gate Bridge stood in the distance, a reminder that sometimes the most important connections aren't the ones that look most impressive on paper. Maya leaned her head back and closed her eyes. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. For now, it was enough to know that she had found her voice, her true voice at last. The next morning, Maya woke to sunlight streaming through the hotel curtains she'd forgotten to close. Her phone showed 27 missed calls and 43 unread messages. She'd silenced it after sending her official recommendation to both boards last night, a 6-page document outlining why the merger, as structured, should not proceed. She ordered room service and sat by the window, watching San Francisco come alive below. Part of her expected to feel regret or anxiety about her decision, but those emotions never came. Instead, she felt a strange lightness, as if she'd set down a heavy burden she'd been carrying for years. The knock on her door announced breakfast, but when she opened it, she found David Wong standing there, his expression grave. "We need to talk," he said, not waiting for an invitation before walking into her room. He looked like he hadn't slept, his usually immaculate appearance slightly disheveled, his eyes bloodshot. "Good morning to you too, David," Maya said, closing the door. "I was about to have breakfast. Would you like some coffee?" "Coffee?" He stared at her incredulously. "Maya, do you have any idea what you've done? The chaos you've created?" She sat down at the small table by the window, motioning for him to join her. "I made a business recommendation based on due diligence findings. That's my job." "Your job," he said, remaining standing, "was to close this deal, a deal we've spent 9 months putting together. A deal worth over $1 billion. He ran his hand through his hair in frustration. "The senior partners are furious. Cloudsphere's CEO is threatening to take his business elsewhere, and TransGlobal's board is considering legal action for breach of good faith negotiations." Maya took a sip of her water, letting his words wash over her. "Have the boards made their decisions yet?" David's anger seemed to deflate slightly at her calmness. He sank into the chair across from her. "No, that's the only reason I'm here instead of delivering your termination papers. Both boards want to speak with you directly before voting." "When?" 4 hours from now." "Video conference," he studied her face. "Maya, I've known you for 8 years. You're the most rational, level-headed person in our firm. What happened yesterday? It wasn't like you." Maya considered his words. "Maybe it should have been like me all along, David." She looked out at the city skyline. "Do you know how many times I've ignored comments, looks, assumptions about my abilities? How many times I've swallowed my anger or hurt because it was unprofessional to address it? How many younger colleagues I've advised to do the same, to focus on the work and not the slights?" David remained silent, watching her. "Yesterday at O'Hare wasn't the first time something like that has happened to me," she continued. "But it was the first time I couldn't compartmentalize it away, and when I looked at those diversity reports, when I saw the pattern, I realized I've been part of the problem." "By closing deals?" David asked, his tone skeptical. "By helping companies like TransGlobal grow and prosper without demanding real accountability," Maya replied. "By telling myself that my success alone was enough to change things when clearly it isn't." A knock at the door announced her breakfast. As she signed for it, David sat in contemplative silence, the fight gone out of him. "What are you going to say to the boards?" he finally asked as she poured coffee for both of them. "The truth," Maya said simply. "That I believe this merger would be a mistake unless TransGlobal makes fundamental changes to its culture, starting from the top." David shook his head. They won't do it. Not now. Not with you having backed them into a corner. Then the deal doesn't happen, Maya replied. And maybe that sends a message that these issues actually matter. David studied her over his coffee cup. You know, if you lose this fight, your career at the firm is probably over. Maya nodded. I know. And if you somehow win it, you'll be labeled difficult or too political by half the clients on Wall Street. Probably, she agreed. Then why do it? Why risk everything you've worked for? Maya considered the question carefully. Because some things are more important than deals, David. Because I want to be able to look at women like Layla without feeling like a hypocrite. Because my voice, the one Trevor found so funny, should be used for something more than just making rich companies richer. David's phone buzzed. He checked it and sighed. The senior partners want me back in New York tonight. They're calling an emergency meeting. He stood, straightening his tie. For what it's worth, I think you're making a mistake, but I respect your courage. After he left, Maya finished her breakfast and opened her laptop. If she was going to face both boards in a few hours, she needed to be prepared. She began making notes outlining not just the problems she'd identified, but potential solutions. Real, structural changes that could transform TransGlobal's culture from the inside out. 3 hours later, dressed in a fresh suit and feeling focused, she sat before her laptop camera as the video conference connected. The screen filled with faces. The board members from CloudSphere on the top row, TransGlobal on the bottom, with Robert Chen and CloudSphere CEO Nina Prajapati in the center. Ms. Johnson, began CloudSphere's board chair, an older woman with sharp eyes. We've read your recommendation against the merger. We've asked you to this meeting to explain, in your own words, why you believe this course of action is in the best interests of both companies. Maya took a deep breath and began speaking. For the next 20 minutes, she laid out her case, not just the incident at O'Hare, but the patterns she'd uncovered in TransGlobal's employment practices, the cultural issues that would make integration with CloudSphere problematic, and the potential long-term risks to the merged company's reputation and performance. In conclusion, she finished, I believe this merger as currently structured would be combining incompatible corporate cultures, which research shows is the primary reason mergers fail. CloudSphere has built its success on innovation and inclusion. TransGlobal's airports division in particular shows troubling patterns that contradict those values. A heavy silence followed her presentation. Then Nina Prajapati, CloudSphere's CEO, spoke up. Thank you for your candor, Ms. Johnson. I have a question. You mentioned as currently structured. Are there conditions under which you would recommend this merger proceed? Maya nodded. Yes, but they would require significant changes at TransGlobal, beginning with a zero-tolerance policy for discriminatory behavior, independently verified diversity metrics with consequences for failure, and new leadership in their airports division. Robert Chen's face darkened. What you're suggesting would mean fundamentally restructuring our organization based on one incident. Not one incident, Maya interrupted firmly. A pattern of incidents, Mr. Chen. Your own data shows it. The question is whether you're willing to address it. Before Chen could respond, Nina Prajapati spoke again. Ms. Johnson, would you be willing to stay on and help implement these changes if we made them conditions of the merger? The question caught Maya by surprise. I would need to think about that, Ms. Prajapati. Please do, Nina replied. We'll be in touch after the board's vote. The screen went dark as the call ended, leaving Maya alone in her hotel room once more. She closed her laptop slowly, uncertain of what had just happened. Had she convinced them, or had she just witnessed the professional equivalent of a polite goodbye? Her phone rang, her boss in New York. Maya braced herself and answered. Maya, he said, his voice tight. I just got off the phone with Nina Prajapati. CloudSphere's board has voted to halt the merger unless TransGlobal agrees to a complete overhaul of their workplace culture policies, with independent oversight of implementation. They've specifically requested that you lead the oversight committee. Maya sat down hard on the edge of the bed. And TransGlobal? Chen is furious, but their board is split. They've called for 24 hours to consider the terms. He paused. I don't know how you did it, but you've turned this entire situation on its head. I just told the truth, Maya said simply. Well, whatever you did, the partners want to see you in New York as soon as possible. There are discussions to be had about your future at the firm. After hanging up, Maya stood at the window watching planes take off and land at San Francisco International Airport in the distance. Whatever happened next, whether the merger proceeded under new terms, whether her career at Global Financial Partners continued, whether she took on this new challenge with Cloudsphere, she knew one thing for certain. She had found her voice, her real voice, and she wouldn't be silencing it again. 6 months later, Maya stood at a podium in a crowded hotel ballroom, facing an audience of financial industry leaders and press. Behind her, a screen displayed the logo of the newly launched Equity Capital Partners, her own investment firm, focused exclusively on funding companies with demonstrated commitments to diversity and ethical business practices. "When I walked away from a billion-dollar deal last year," she said into the microphone, "many people thought I was committing career suicide. What they didn't understand was that I wasn't ending something. I was beginning something." She gestured to the team standing in the front row, a diverse group of financial experts she'd recruited, including Layla, who had followed her from Global Financial Partners. "Today, I'm proud to announce that Equity Capital Partners has secured $1.5 billion in committed funds for our first investment round, and our first partner company will be Cloudsphere Technology, which, as you may know, recently walked away from its own merger when its potential partner refused to make the necessary changes to its corporate culture." The audience applauded as Nina Prajapati joined Maya on stage. The two women shook hands as cameras flashed. "Sometimes," Maya continued, her voice strong and clear, "the most powerful thing we can do is simply refuse to accept the unacceptable, whether that's a hurtful comment, a toxic workplace, or a billion-dollar deal that compromises our values." From the back of the room, Maya spotted a familiar face. Patricia, the teacher she'd met on the flight to San Francisco. Patricia smiled and gave her a thumbs up. "My voice was mocked by someone who thought it didn't belong to me," Maya said, looking out at the sea of faces. "But today that voice is launching a fund that will change lives, and that is something I'm proud to say sounds exactly like me." The applause that followed was deafening. As Maya stepped away from the podium, she knew that what had begun as a painful incident at O'Hare Airport had transformed into something powerful and meaningful. She had turned humiliation into purpose, and in doing so found not just her voice but her calling.